Heavenly Stories.
In the land of Egypt, where the Nile River flowed like a lifeline through the desert, the Israelites lived as strangers in a foreign land. Centuries had passed since their ancestor Joseph had risen to power, his wisdom saving Egypt from famine. But now, the descendants of Jacob were enslaved, their numbers swelling until they became a threat in the eyes of a new Pharaoh, one who knew nothing of Joseph's legacy. Fearful of their growth, he issued cruel decrees, forcing the Israelites into backbreaking labor, building cities like Pithom and Ramses under the lash of taskmasters. Their cries of anguish rose to the heavens, unheard by the king but not by the God of their fathers. Amid this oppression, in the tribe of Levi, a woman named Jochebed gave birth to a son. The child, with eyes bright and curious, was born under a shadow of terror, for Pharaoh had commanded that all Hebrew male infants be cast into the Nile to drown. Jochebed, her heart torn between fear and hope, hid her baby for 3 months, tucking him away in their modest home. But as the child grew, so did the danger. The whispers of Egyptian enforcers grew closer, and Jochebed knew she could no longer keep him hidden. With trembling hands and a prayer in her heart, Jochebed crafted a basket of papyrus reeds, sealing it with pitch to make it watertight. She placed her son inside, swaddling him in soft cloths, and set the basket among the reeds along the Nile's edge. Her daughter, Miriam, stood watch from a distance, her young eyes scanning the riverbank for any sign of hope. The current lapped gently at the basket, as if the river itself held its breath. Then, by divine providence, Pharaoh's daughter came to bathe at the river, her attendants trailing behind her. She spotted the basket and, moved by curiosity, ordered it brought to her. When she opened it, the baby's cries pierced the air, and her heart softened. "This must be one of the Hebrew children," she said, yet her voice held no malice. Miriam, bold beyond her years, stepped forward and offered a solution. "Shall I fetch a Hebrew woman to nurse the child for you?" Pharaoh's daughter agreed, and Miriam ran to retrieve Jochebed. Thus, by a miracle, the mother was paid to nurse her own son, raising him in the shadow of Egypt's palaces. The princess named the boy Moses, meaning, drawn out, for she had drawn him from the water. As Moses grew, he was raised in the royal court, educated in Egyptian ways, yet his heart remained tethered to his people. He saw their suffering, their bent backs under the sun, and a fire began to burn within him, a fire that would one day lead them to freedom. Moses stood at the edge of the Egyptian palace, his fine linen garments a stark contrast to the dusty, sweat-soaked tunics of his people laboring in the fields beyond. Raised as a prince of Egypt, he carried the weight of 2 worlds, the privilege of Pharaoh's court and the unspoken bond with the Hebrews, his true kin. Now a man in his prime, Moses could no longer ignore the cries of the Israelites, their bodies broken under the whips of taskmasters. The injustice gnawed at him, a fire growing in his chest with each passing day. One fateful afternoon, Moses wandered among the work sites, his eyes scanning the rows of laborers hauling bricks under the scorching sun. There, he saw an Egyptian overseer beating a Hebrew slave, the man's cries drowned out by the crack of the whip. Rage surged within Moses. Glancing around to ensure no one watched, he struck the overseer with a force he hadn't known he possessed. The man crumpled to the ground, lifeless. Heart pounding, Moses buried the body in the sand, but the secret wouldn't stay hidden. Word spread among the Hebrews, and soon, even Pharaoh heard of the prince who had killed for a slave. Betrayed by his own act, Moses fled Egypt, leaving behind the only life he had known, a fugitive under the shadow of death. The desert stretched before him, vast and unforgiving, as he journeyed to Midian, a land far from Egypt's reach. There, at a well, he met Zipporah, the daughter of Jethro, a Midianite priest. Her dark eyes and quiet strength drew him in, and in time, Moses married her, settling into the life of a shepherd. Days turned to years, and the palace of Egypt faded into memory, replaced by the bleating of sheep and the simplicity of desert life. Yet, even in Midian, Moses could not escape the weight of his people's suffering, a distant ache that never left him. One day, while tending Jethro's flocks near Horeb, the mountain of God, Moses noticed a strange sight, a bush ablaze with fire, yet unconsumed. Curiosity pulled him closer, and as he approached, a voice thundered from the flames, "Moses! Moses!" He froze, his staff trembling in his hand. "I am the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Moses hid his face, overwhelmed by the divine presence. God spoke of the Israelites' cries, their oppression in Egypt, and his plan to deliver them to a land flowing with milk and honey. "I am sending you to Pharaoh," God declared, "to bring my people out of Egypt." Moses' heart sank. "Who am I to go to Pharaoh?" he stammered, his voice thick with doubt. But God was unyielding, promising his presence and giving Moses signs, a staff that turned into a snake, a hand that became leprous and was healed, and the assurance that the Nile's waters could turn to blood. God revealed his name, "I am who I am," a mystery that anchored Moses' mission. Though fear lingered, Moses accepted the call, setting out for Egypt with Zipporah and their sons, the burning bush seared into his soul. The sands of Midian lay far behind as Moses trudged toward Egypt, his staff in hand and his family at his side. The voice from the burning bush echoed in his mind, a divine charge to free his people from slavery. Yet, doubt gnawed at him. Would the Israelites trust a fugitive shepherd? Would Pharaoh, the god-king of Egypt, heed a man who once fled his wrath? God had promised signs and wonders, but the weight of the task pressed heavily on Moses' shoulders. At a desert encampment, a mysterious encounter with God nearly cost Moses his life, spared only by Zipporah's quick act of circumcising their son, a reminder of the covenant's sacred demands. In Egypt, Moses reunited with his brother Aaron, whom God had sent to aid him. Aaron, with his gift for words, embraced Moses warmly, their bond rekindled after decades apart. Together, they gathered the Israelite elders, sharing God's promise of deliverance. Moses performed the signs, his staff became a serpent, then wood again, his hand turned leprous, then whole. The elders, their faces weathered by years of toil, bowed in awe, hope flickering in their weary eyes. For the first time in generations, they dared to believe freedom was near. The brothers approached Pharaoh's palace, its towering columns and golden splendor a stark contrast to the mud-brick hovels of the slaves. Standing before the king, Moses and Aaron spoke boldly, "The God of Israel says, let my people go to worship me in the wilderness." Pharaoh, seated on his throne, his eyes cold and unyielding, scoffed. "Who is this God? I do not know him, and I will not let Israel go." His voice dripped with disdain, dismissing their request as the whim of a powerless deity. Worse, he saw the Hebrews' hope as a threat. That same day, he issued a cruel decree: the Israelites must now gather their own straw to make bricks, yet produce the same quota. The taskmaster's whips fell harder, and the people's groans filled the air. The Israelites turned on Moses and Aaron, their newfound hope curdling into anger. "You've made us a stench to Pharaoh," they cried, their dreams of freedom crushed under heavier burdens. Moses, heartsick, retreated to pray, pouring out his frustration to God. "Why have you brought trouble on your people?" he asked, his voice raw. God's response was firm yet reassuring: "Now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. With a mighty hand, he will let them go." God promised to unleash his power, revealing himself not only to Israel but to all Egypt. Moses and Aaron returned to Pharaoh, their resolve steeled. In the palace courtyard, Aaron cast down his staff, and it became a serpent. Pharaoh's magicians matched the feat, their rods also turning to snakes, but Aaron's serpent swallowed theirs, a sign of God's supremacy. Still, Pharaoh's heart hardened, unmoved by the display. The stage was set for a greater showdown, one that would shake the foundations of Egypt and test the faith of God's chosen people. The Nile, Egypt's lifeblood, shimmered under the morning sun as Moses and Aaron stood at its bank, facing Pharaoh's retinue. God had spoken, and now the time for signs had come. Aaron raised his staff, striking the water, and the Nile turned to blood, its currents thick and crimson. Fish died in droves, their bodies floating on the surface, and a foul stench rose, choking the air. Egypt's people, from Pharaoh to the lowliest servant, recoiled in horror, unable to drink. Yet, Pharaoh's magicians mimicked the miracle with their sorcery, and his heart remained stone cold. 7 days later, the river cleared, but Egypt's troubles had only begun. Frogs swarmed next, spilling from the Nile in countless hordes, invading homes, beds, and ovens. Their croaking filled the night, a relentless chorus of chaos. Pharaoh, rattled, summoned Moses and Aaron, promising to let the Israelites go if the frogs vanished. Moses prayed, and the frogs died, their corpses piled in heaps. But once relief came, Pharaoh reneged, his pride unbroken. God's hand grew heavier. Lice infested man and beast, a plague the magicians couldn't replicate, admitting, "This is the finger of God." Still, Pharaoh refused to yield. Swarms of flies followed, darkening the skies, defiling Egypt's homes, except in Goshen, where the Israelites lived, untouched. Pharaoh wavered, offering a compromise: worship in Egypt, not the wilderness. Moses refused, knowing God's command was absolute. The flies departed, but Pharaoh's heart hardened again. Then came the plagues of pestilence, striking Egypt's livestock dead, while Israel's herd stood strong. Boils erupted on Egyptian skin, tormenting even the magicians. Hail rained down, shattering crops and trees, sparing only Goshen. Each time, Pharaoh's resolve cracked, only to solidify once the plague lifted. Locusts devoured what the hail spared, stripping Egypt bare. Darkness fell next, a thick, palpable gloom that smothered the land for 3 days, yet Goshen glowed with light. Pharaoh, desperate, offered to let the men go, but not the women, children, or flocks. Moses stood firm, all must go. Pharaoh's anger flared, threatening Moses' life, banishing him from court. As Moses left, God revealed the final blow: at midnight, every firstborn in Egypt would die, from Pharaoh's heir to the lowliest servant's child, unless the Israelites were freed. Moses relayed God's instructions to the Israelites: slaughter a lamb, smear its blood on their doorposts, and eat a hurried meal of roasted meat, bitter herbs, and unleavened bread. The blood would mark their homes, and the angel of death would pass over them. Fear and anticipation gripped the people as they obeyed, their faith tested in the shadow of Egypt's impending doom. Egypt lay shrouded in grief as midnight struck. A wail rose from every house, piercing the stillness, as the angel of death claimed the firstborn of Egypt, from Pharaoh's heir to the prisoner's child. In the palace, the king's cries mingled with his people's, his heart shattered by the loss of his son. The Israelites, marked by the blood of the Lamb on their doorposts, were spared, their homes untouched by the divine judgment. In Goshen, they ate the Passover meal in haste, dressed for travel, staffs in hand, ready to flee the land of their oppression. Pharaoh, broken at last, summoned Moses and Aaron in the dead of night. "Go," he roared, his voice raw with anguish. "Take your people, your flocks, everything, and leave Egypt." The Egyptians, desperate to see the Israelites gone, pressed gold, silver, and clothing into their hands, fulfilling God's promise that they would not leave empty-handed. The Israelites, some 600,000 men plus women and children, gathered their belongings, their unleavened dough still in kneading bowls. After 430 years in Egypt, they marched out, a vast multitude under the cover of night, led by a pillar of cloud by day and fire by night. The journey was chaotic, their steps hurried yet uncertain. Moses carried the bones of Joseph, honoring his ancestors' wish to rest in the promised land. But freedom's joy was tempered by fear. Pharaoh, his grief turning to rage, regretted his decision. He rallied his chariots, 600 of Egypt's finest, and pursued the Israelites with a vengeance. The Hebrews, encamped by the Red Sea, saw the dust of the approaching army and panicked. Trapped between the sea and Pharaoh's forces, they cried out to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us here to die?" Moses, his face resolute, raised his staff. "Do not fear. Stand firm and see the salvation of the Lord." God spoke, commanding Moses to stretch his hand over the sea. A mighty east wind blew all night, parting the waters, creating a dry path flanked by walls of water. The Israelites, awestruck, crossed through the sea, their feet treading on ground where fish had swam hours before. The pillar of fire held back the Egyptians, giving the Hebrews time to pass. As dawn broke, Pharaoh's chariots charged into the path, their wheels churning the seabed. But God threw them into confusion, clogging their wheels. Realizing their doom, the Egyptians fled, but it was too late. Moses stretched his hand again, and the waters crashed down, swallowing Pharaoh's army, horses, and chariots. Not one survived. On the far shore, the Israelites stood in stunned silence, then erupted in song, led by Moses and Miriam, praising God for their deliverance. "The Lord is my strength and my song, he has become my salvation." The Red Sea's waters lay still behind the Israelites, a silent testament to their miraculous escape. Freedom was theirs, yet the wilderness ahead stretched vast and daunting, a crucible that would test their faith. The pillar of cloud led them by day, the pillar of fire by night, guiding a nation of former slaves toward the land God had promised. Moses, staff in hand, walked with purpose, his eyes fixed on the divine signs, though the people's murmurs of doubt trailed him like dust. Hunger soon gnawed at their bellies. In the wilderness of sin, they grumbled, longing for Egypt's pots of meat, their memories of slavery warped by desperation. "Did God bring us out to starve?" they cried. Moses turned to God, and the answer came, manna, a flaky, sweet bread from heaven, blanketing the ground each morning. Quails arrived at dusk, their meat a gift to silence the complaints. God provided, but with a lesson: gather only what was needed, trust in daily provision. Some hoarded, only to find their manna spoiled, a rebuke to their lack of faith. Through these trials, the Israelites began to learn dependence on God, though their hearts often wavered. Water, too, was scarce. At Marah, they found bitter springs, undrinkable, and their cries rose again. Moses prayed, and God showed him a tree to cast into the water, making it sweet. At Elim, 12 springs and 70 palms offered rest, but such oases were rare. When Amalekites attacked at Rephidim, Moses stood atop a hill, arms raised in prayer, as Joshua led the fight below. As long as Moses' arms held high, Israel prevailed; when they drooped, Amalek gained ground. Aaron and Hur propped him up, and victory came, a sign of God's power through unity. The journey led to Sinai, its rugged peak piercing the sky. Here, God called Moses to ascend, the mountain trembling with thunder and smoke as the divine presence descended. The Israelites, encamped below, washed their garments and purified themselves, awestruck by the holy spectacle. God spoke the 10 Commandments, his voice like a storm, etching a covenant into their hearts: worship no other gods, honor the Sabbath, love one another. The people, trembling, agreed, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. Moses received the law, tablets of stone inscribed by God's finger, a guide for a free people to live justly. Yet, even at Sinai, their faith faltered. While Moses lingered on the mountain, the people grew restless, crafting a golden calf, a false god to lead them. God's wrath burned, but Moses interceded, pleading for mercy. The idol was destroyed, the covenant renewed, though the wilderness would test them for 40 years before they reached the promised land. At Sinai, they stood as a nation bound to God, their freedom forged not just from Egypt's chains but in the fire of faith and obedience.